Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with a discussion of the films that are included in the Criterion Collection box set from 2020, which is called The Complete Films of Agnes Varda. And in particular, I'd like to focus our attention today, if I may, on the fifth Blu-ray disc in the set, which is referred to as Program 5. And the title given to Program 5 is Married Life. The fifth disc, Program 5, is given the title Married Life. And that's a particularly apt title, of course, because the films that are collected on this particular Program 5 disc are all dealing, in one form or another, with aspects or discussions or portrayals in one sense, or many senses, of marriage or married life, and all that entails on an emotional level and also on a societal level and beyond, and also on a philosophical level as well. The films in particular are from 1965, Le Bonheur, from 1966, Les Créatures, and from 1966, ELSA La Rose. And they seem, I think, on one aspect, they seem to be very distinct, separate films from one another, thus making for really captivating and quite arresting conversation and discussion in the context of Agnes Varda's filmography on the one hand. But also, I would also suggest that these films are very much on point and similar and operating on a consistent rhythm and a thematic discussion that we have seen, an artistic discussion that we have seen in Agnes Varda's filmography, because they all seem to deal in one form or another with not just depictions of human relationships, not just depictions of relationships between lovers and intimates, and also adults and children, and also depictions of what is happiness and what is the nature of human emotion and portrayals of such. But we're also dealing with depictions of quote-unquote the real, and trying to give earnest portrayals of human beings and humanity. And also we see the wonderful line between what is truth in cinema and what is fiction in cinema, and how this line is beautifully managed and also quite artistically and poetically blurred by Varda's cinema herself, thus creating this wonderful sense of confusion and also a sense of an inherent nature of Varda's cinema, that being an exploration of the authentic or real, even when it's using aspects of cinema that are either very much like a documentary, or when using aspects of cinema that are very much like a poetic and lyrical application trying to depict narrative cinema. So we get all of this and more, I would suggest, in this collection of films, which is called Married Life. The first film that is included in this collection on Program 5 is the film Le Bonheur from 1965. And this film is given the title Le Bonheur, which can be translated into English as happiness. This is a really intriguing and complex and quite philosophically profound and morally ambiguous work that is also operating with a wry sense of the application of the art form of cinema, while giving us contradictions and quite disturbing moral ambiguities that lead to question upon question. And I dare say that Varda's cinema brilliantly maintains a sense of the difficult nature of a lot of these questions, and so it doesn't yield answers very easily, which I think is very fundamental and very key to a lot of the questions that are being posed. In essence, the film is about a depiction of a relationship or a family, and this is the family unit or the family life between a man and a woman that are married and their 2 children. And so we have depictions of this family unit, of this family life, painted with very colorful brushstrokes of the mise-en-scène and camera work, given vivid life and detail through the very almost painterly use of color and bright lights, and the application of lovely music to paint this overall idyllic and Garden of Eden type of portrayal of family life. And we get, therefore, inherently the temptation as viewers to think that maybe this is the quote-unquote happiness that's being referred to in the title. But as we go along, we realize that things are a bit more, or perhaps a lot more, complicated than that kind of depiction might seem. And it's also inherent also with the depiction, or the description, if you will, of this unit in this Garden of Eden-like setting. Because as with the concept of the Garden of Eden, we have the concept of temptation and straying away from this form of the idyllic, and what that means in these concrete human relationship settings, and the emotional stakes that are raised, specifically when we have one character essentially committing or being tempted by another woman to the point of considering or perhaps even committing infidelity outside of the marriage relationship, and what that means going forward in the context of this depicted family life. So that is, in essence, what I would characterize as being the narrative plot of the film Le Bonheur. And so what do we get from this film, Le Bonheur? I think we get a morally ambiguous world depicted with vivid, bright colors and beautiful notes of music that still give us shades and contradictions, and presents question upon question that does not yield answers very easily. And in fact, the moral ambiguity of the nature of the characters and certain characters in particular, and what their choices are, and how they in turn internalize those choices and present to us, the viewers, and also to the characters in this film, their viewpoints on life and on living, and how that might seem on the surface to be a great expression of freedom. However, in this world, things have consequence, and whether those consequences are expressed directly or outwardly in the form of, say, narrative steps within the plot going forward from point A to point B, or if they are expressed, those consequences, if they're expressed in a more meditative sense of the impact on the human heart and human emotions, if at all. Whatever the case may be, I think we are left with a thoroughly compelling work that is, as I say, very uneasy, and it's often been described as being a very sharp, controversial human drama, also being described in some levels as being a kind of horror film, because of the shocking nature of how human emotion and the nature of relationships, how they unfold, especially or in particular when specific incidents arise, putting a spotlight on the impact of choice, and also the nature of what it is we think of when we think of the concept of happiness. And so there's a lot of food for thought here, and there's a lot of unease and disquiet, and something of the disturbing, especially or perhaps made even more pronounced by the use of the beautiful and the colorful and the lush and the almost outwardly romantic. That is the key to the brilliance of this film, and many others, in fact. Many other keys exist, but that is one of the primary keys of the brilliance of this film, in my opinion, Le Bonheur. And we have also the great Varda cinematic traits of the blurring of the line between the real and the cinematic. We have the casting of Jean-Claude Drouot and Claire Drouot. So real life, they were married in real life, and so they're playing the married couple and their children as well. So we have the real and the fiction playing this interesting role in a film that is focusing in on the marriage and the relationship. And this aspect of that blurring of the lines actually is discussed in in a very profound way in some of the supplements, which I'll talk about in a moment. So this overall is a brilliant work from Agnès Varda called Le Bonheur. And then we get the 1966 film Les Créatures, which is a brilliant, almost avant-garde depiction of another relationship and another marriage, and this time in the context of creation and the drive of authorship and storytelling, and how that seems to either negatively affect a relationship, or perhaps it is speaking to something more fundamental about the need for an outlet, or the need to rely on creation, or the act of creating, in order to somehow create a sense of organization or elsewhere in the mode or context of a relationship between this particular couple, played by Catherine Deneuve and Michel Piccoli. So this is one of, I think, Agnès Varda's most perhaps avant-garde type of works. It's a film that really blurs the line between what is real and what isn't. We get this story about a man who is trying to create something, and along the way we see scenes that might suggest that the scenes of the story that he is creating, but we're not sure where the line starts and where it ends. And so this is again another great example of Varda's cinema and Varda's treatment of reality and fiction, and the blurring of the line between the two, in the context of creativity, in the context of the depiction of a relationship. And maybe we see the breakdown of a relationship, or maybe we see what end up being the fundamental building blocks of a relationship and a family. Who knows? Again, this is another film that, like Le Bonheur, I think is subject to many interpretations, and it is therefore a very rich and quite a very artistically bold example of Varda cinema from this period, the 1960s. A really interesting, captivating work, Les Créatures. And then we have the work called ELSA La Rose, and this is, in essence, a depiction of a very specific aspect of the relationship between Louis Aragon and Elsa Triolet. And so we get this depiction of these two intellectuals, artist intellectuals. But what's so interesting about this work is, well, there are many interesting things about this work, in my opinion. First, it seems to be yet another example of the fascination that Varda has for the artist intellectual. That's, I think, very clear. And we've seen this in many of her other past works. Some of her other shorter works seem to give this indication. And this is another example of that in a great way, in a loving way. Also, we get another angle, if you will, on the notion of a relationship. Unlike, however, say, the other films in this collection, Le Bonheur and Les Créatures, at least on one way of looking at it, this film, ELSA La Rose, perhaps can be best described as being a reflection on the nature of this relationship. And although this couple is an intellectual one in terms of how they are known to the public and how they are known to the world, what's fascinating about this depiction is that we are given a very intimate and emotional portrayal of this relationship, and in particular of the feelings that were addressed to ELSA LA ROSE, the title in particular, the title in question, and what it meant, this devotion, this nature, and this love and this emotional bond. What it meant and how it was expressed in the words of Aragon through the narrated voice of Michel Piccoli, of course. And so I think this is a beautiful portrait that is encapsulating many different facets of the interests of Varda and her cinema, while still maintaining yet another avenue of exploration in this theme that we call here married life. So again, another great example of Varda cinema during this time. So with that, we have these 3 films that are included in this Program 5 disc. But we also get the supplements, and these are great supplements that are included here. Many of the supplements are devoted to Le Bonheur, but we do get a number of supplements devoted to Les Créatures and also to ELSA LA ROSE. So what do we get? So the first set of supplements for Le Bonheur are really great, and the first of which is the introduction that Varda herself gives on Le Bonheur. This is from 1998, and approximately 3 minutes. Here she talks about the casting, and she talks about Jean-Claude Dureau, and also the use of the purposeful application of the visual style, what she describes as being like the French painter impressionistic style, and the use of Mozart, but also applying that in a forceful way to create provocative contradictions that lead to these, what eventually become, in essence, philosophical questions on exactly what happiness is, and is it really a thing, or is it some kind of social construct, or there's something of a sinister and vicious edge to this this notion that we have of what is happiness. And I think it's all being hinted at and directly commented upon here in this great introduction from Varda, approximately 3 minutes. But that's not all, because we then get a great introduction, or not great interview, approximately 6 minutes, which is given the title of The Two Women of Le Bonheur. And the 2 women that are referred to are Claire Drouot and Marie-France Boyer, and they play the 2 female characters here, Thérèse and Émilie, respectively. And they are, of course, very important because there is a kind of triangle that exists in this film, and here we have the 2 actors being interviewed in a lovely discussion by Rosalie Varda from 2006. And as I mentioned before, Claire Drouot herself was the real life wife of Jean-Claude Drouot. And that is an interesting detail which comes through in this interview, in this discussion, because they talk about their experiences on the film, working with Agnès Varda, and how the film has impacted them. And along the way, there's a really great discussion of one of the very ambiguous, purposefully ambiguous moments of the film. And I won't go into detail on what it is, but there are some really ambiguous elements. And these 2 actors here, they talk about their interpretations of some of these elements. And they come to very different interpretations, which is fascinating, especially considering the characters that they play. So that is a great example of how this is another wonderful supplement that really shed light on a complex work that is filled with contradiction and ambiguity. So, and to hear their interpretations, as I say, is itself so engaging. So that's an example of why I think that's a great one to listen to and to watch. The Two Women of Le Bonheur. That's not all, because then we get a great, almost round table discussion. It's called The Thoughts Thoughts on Le Bonheur. This is also from 2006, and this is gathering together four intellectuals: Fadela Amora, Frédéric Bonneau, Michel Manceau, and Gérard Vaugeois, and they talk about their recollections of the film Le Bonheur, and they speak of the philosophical and moral ambiguities of the concept of happiness and how hard it is to define, and how indeed Varda's cinema doesn't make it any easier. In fact, on purpose, it seems to be making it a very complex morass, if you will, of this otherwise seemingly fundamentally simple concept of what happiness is or what it could be. But the more we delve deeply into this, the more we realize how very complicated it is. I think if we were to boil it down to its essence, it's the idea of if the concept of happiness is one that, due to circumstances of reality, cannot exist in a vacuum. What it means in essence is that happiness is something to do with an act or state of mind of a human being or human existence. But like with all acts or states, things have consequence. And so if things have consequence, what if those consequences are not always themselves positive? What if they can turn into negative consequences? Does that still mean that the initial state of happiness is indeed one of happiness, or is it something much more sinister or much colder or much darker? Again, I'm not quite sure, and I think the discussion among these four intellectuals leads one to varying possible interpretations, as well as other discussions along the way. So this is a great discussion to watch. There is a particular focus on the idyllic and the Garden of Eden, and also how one feels, the viewer. Some of these intellectuals have known the film for a long time. Others have been introduced to it rather recently. Still, each has a great perspective. They react to it in a certain way. They have different interpretations about the character motivations in some aspects, and so on and so forth. So this is really valuable to listen to, and it's one where one can join into the conversation in a manner of speaking, and then also come away with it still having one's own views intact while listening to other points of view. So all in all, this is another essential one to watch. Thoughts on Le Bonheur from 2006, approximately 15 minutes. Then we have another section of the supplement, which is called What is Happiness? From 2006, and the first is called Happiness? The People of Fontenay Respond, from 2006 by Agnès Varda, and this is Agnès Varda taking her camera to Fontenay aux Roses and asking the residents there, the townspeople there, about their concept or their notion of what is happiness. And we get this loving, earnest portrayal of people in a place and time associated very directly with Le Bonheur, of course, but also Varda's camera trying to capture the directness of the human experience. We've seen this time and time again in Varda's cinema, and we're seeing it here again now. What a lovely portrait this is, approximately 5 minutes. But that's not all, because we get another program, also from 2006, called Bonheur, Proper Noun or Concept. And this is the concept of happiness as put forth in literature, and also bonheur, how that has affected certain people whose name is bonheur. And so there's this interesting combination of the appreciation of literature and also the real life lived in experiences of specific people that are being shown to speak directly to Varda's camera and thus to us. So another stellar example of the concerns of Varda here in 2006, again in the context of Le Bonheur, which is great. But that's not all, because then we get another program from 2006 called Jean-Claude Dureau Returns. And this returns refers to Jean-Claude Dureau, who is one of the actors who plays one of the main characters in the film, and he returns to Fontenay aux Roses. This is can be said to be also, in essence, a kind of extension of the earlier short films related to Le Bonheur and Fontenay aux Roses that we have already seen. This time we get a focus in on Jean-Claude Dureau himself, which is fascinating, and to hear him speak and to see him visit some of these places is great, and also to see him interact with some of the townspeople, the residents, and it gives him and them the opportunity to relate to us some anecdotes about the shooting of Le Bonheur. There's a really interesting anecdote about the very famous scene involving the post office, and so that's an example of the great anecdotes that we have in store when watching this one, again from 2006, approximately 10 minutes. And that is not all, because then we get a 1964 segment from or segment from a 1964 program from TV, Des Monts et Merveilles du Cinéma, and this is featuring some interview footage with Varda herself. Again, 1964, so it's showing us also her work on the film, making of the film. It's approximately 4 minutes, but still a great window into the creative processes of Agnès Varda, the filmmaker and artist. So again, another essential one to watch. And then to round out the Le Bonheur supplements, we get a great trailer for the film. But returning to the disc as a whole, we have the other two films, of course. So the film Les Créatures has itself associated with it a number of supplements, not as many as Le Bonheur, but still very good to have. The first is an introduction from 2012, approximately 2 minutes. This is with Agnès Varda, and here she's speaking, again, very briefly, but still very essentially about the aspects of the film, the genesis behind her wanting to make the film, and the reaction to the film, how she reacts to the film now, certain aspects that she sees as artistically successful, maybe other aspects that she sees maybe where she might have done things a little bit differently, discussions a little bit about the music, Pierre Barbeau, etc. So another essential introduction from the artist herself, this time about Les Créatures. But that's not all, because then we get a 1965 French television program footage that shows Varda in the midst of completing filming of the film Les Créatures, and also engaging or beginning to consider aspects of the post-production process on the film Les Créatures. So there's a great way, so Varda's talking about the film itself, and she's talking about her philosophy and approach to the post-production process. There's a little example of a pickup shot that she's shooting, and there's a great discussion too of the music, because the music of Les Créatures is in itself its own character. It's eerie, it has a boldness of presence, and the concept and design of the music is a great and fascinating story in and of itself, and so we get hints of that here. Wonderful stuff. So this is approximately 18 minutes, again from 1965. And then with regard to the work ELSA LA ROSE, we get the introduction from 2007 from Varda herself, and here it's approximately 2 minutes, and she's talking about the initial concept of the project, the initial involvement of Jacques Demy, and what the project ended up becoming, and how that process turned Varda's attention away from what the initial concept was to a specific focus on what it became, and the focus on the depiction or the portrayal, if you will, or the remembrances or the recollection or reflection on this relationship vis-a-vis the literally based and emotionally based dedications that became the subject matter, Elsa Triolet or Elsa La Rose. So another essential interview or introduction, excuse me, to have from Agnès Varda herself. And so that, my friends, is the collection of supplements that is associated with the collection of films here that is found on Program 5, Married Life, which is found in the great set, the complete films of Agnès Varda. Again, another fascinating glimpse. Each film seems to be, on the one hand, its own separate, distinct entity, and they are, because they are dealing with their own specific themes and workings. At the same time, as what I've tried to suggest, they do operate in a consistent way in the world of the filmography of Agnes Varda. The depiction of human beings and their relationships, the focus in on people and place and time, the use of, or the line between what is real and what is fiction, and the blurring of that line, the application of poetic, cinematic tools and constructions, also the reliance on documentary type of techniques, and also the way that cinema can be seen to be playful, very artistic, sometimes avant-garde, sometimes contradictory, oftentimes very challenging, and also very thought-provoking, and leading to further questions. And Varda's cinema is challenging. It is also emotionally rewarding, and also very beautiful, and also very much full of profoundly set questions that lead way to furthering discussions that will hopefully linger on as one dives deeply into this fascinating world of Agnes Varda, again, as expressed through these films collected on this Program 5 disc called Married Life. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I really appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.